Loneliness within the elderly community is very common but easily preventable. Welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Break. Professor Jason Powell and Eric Peterson join me today to talk about what we can do to end the loneliness facing the senior community. Hi, I'm Dr. Nafisa Sikandri, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. I created the Mental Health Break podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you prioritize your mental health. Mental illness can cost you time and money. Ignoring your symptoms will only make the problems worse. Taking time out of your busy day to dedicate to improving your mental health can lead to long-term health and wellness. In this podcast, each week you'll learn tips, tricks, and proven strategies to help you regain control of your life, all while prioritizing your mental health. If you want to improve your life, regain control of your mental health, and feel empowered, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transforming Anxiety course, an online, self-paced anxiety course to help you manage and control your anxiety from the comfort, privacy, and convenience of your own home. Learn how to transform your anxiety in just 6 short weeks. Course registration is now open. To learn more, visit transforminganxiety.com/course. I'm excited to talk to Eric Peterson and Professor Jason Powell today about the loneliness impacting the senior community. Let me briefly introduce them before I bring them on. Eric Peterson is the CEO and founder of Seniors for Seniors, a nonprofit organization. Seniors for Seniors engages in the reduction of isolation, loneliness, and depression in our youth and older adults. As a caregiver in a senior community, Eric was aware of these challenges which the senior residents he cared for were facing daily. He also became aware that our youth, especially those in their high school years, were also having these same challenges, and he decided to take action. Eric developed Seniors for Seniors, a program which brings together the older adults and youth in our communities, enabling enriching real human connections. This program establishes connection between individuals with shared interests with a focus on career aspirations of the youth that correspond to career backgrounds of the older adults. This is a unique approach that enables relationships that truly touch the human heart and mind. Professor Jason Powell is the Senior Vice President of Seniors for Seniors. Currently, Professor Powell is Provost at the Manchester Institute of Learning and Excellence and Visiting Professor at the University of Chester, as well as an elected academician of the Academy of Urbanism. Recently, Professor Powell became Fellow of the Royal Society for Public Health and Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts because of his lifetime contribution to research on aging. According to Google Scholar, Professor Powell is the most cited researcher of all time for his research on care and age. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of the Mental Health Break podcast.
Thank you for having us, Nafisa.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to be here.
So I did share a little bit about your background and your work with connecting the youth with seniors. Can each of you just take a brief second to talk a little bit about your own backgrounds and how you got started with the people that you serve?
I serve as a senior caregiver in a QMAP in a senior living community, and doing so gave me the idea for this program because I was seeing the challenges they were facing that we'll discuss in a little bit.
For the last sort of 27, 28 years, I've had an interest in aging, gerontology. And one of the big issues for me is obviously issues to do with mental health and old age, and how that can be addressed by intergenerational connections. And obviously, I've been a researcher, and for the past year and a half, I've worked very closely with Eric in working close together with regard to the Seniors for Seniors program. But my background has very much been based upon being a researcher and an academic, and engaged in research on aging.
All right, wonderful. So I know that the senior community right now, especially with the pandemic and with everything that's been going on, but even before the pandemic, they've been very isolated. And one of the reasons that your information interested me is because I am concerned. I have worked with seniors. I do work with seniors right now, but I also know that they're more isolated than ever, and the pandemic made it even worse due to social distancing. Can you talk a little bit about what the current stats are in terms of the impact of mental illness on the mental health and physical health of seniors, and then how your program helps with that?
Well, I mean, what I would say, I mean, obviously we've got two perspectives, haven't we? There's one which comes from the UK and there's one that comes from the US. But one of the startling continuities in terms of mental health on old age, in care settings in particular, especially during COVID, was that there was a visible population, big visible population in those care homes, but that were made invisible. And unfortunately, they were made invisible in terms of that their stories, their narratives, and their experiences were not listened to. And that obviously created the conditions by which they felt even more isolated and more lonely. And obviously, this has been an enduring feature pre-COVID, during COVID, and hopefully we're challenging it for the future so that future generations realise that loneliness and isolation should be, challenged at every level by everyone, and everyone's got a responsibility to challenge that. But it has had a massive impact on older people and younger people as well, I would suggest. In the UK in particular, there were many cases of where, for example's sake, where many older people had COVID, were told to go to hospital, and then were transferred back into the care home with COVID symptoms. And unfortunately, ageism played a key role with regard to, beds needed to be sort of being put in place in hospitals. And then obviously older people then were discharged too quickly back into care homes. And that led to a proliferation where one could argue, we saw an enormous rise, as it were, of older people in care homes getting COVID. And obviously that affected their physical health, but obviously mental health too, because to find out that was going on as a practice, imagine living in those institutions and feeling and knowing that this has happened commonplace, say, for example, within the UK. One of the sort of important issues, especially again within the US, with the devastating stats that we've seen with regard to, people's mortality rates, is it over 500,000 in America and over 170,000 in Britain? As highlighted that, we need to value people a lot more in the context of and listening in terms of people's stories and experiences, and take that step back. For me, it's had a massive impact in terms of people's mental health, being isolated, being stuck in a care home, not having visitors, not being allowed out because obviously of social distancing and risk to health. The program, as it were, that Eric has cultivated, as it were, is one transformational way, that one transformational feature that can address that particular problem. But you're right. The issue of loneliness as being one is defined at one level by one academic as an epidemic. I mean, people call COVID an epidemic, but loneliness is an epidemic too. And part of that process is about looking at the conditions by which we can sort of focus upon looking at health, the idea of wellness, the idea of something in recent times called social prescription model, where older people are given the opportunity to, rather than be medicalized, get involved in looking at green, say for example, rural areas, green trees, green spaces, and that makes their well-being feel that little bit more enhanced, especially now as more and more people get vaccinated. But one of the, I guess what I'm trying to get to, as it were, is that one of the big solutions to these problems, as it were, is something that Eric had cultivated in terms of his originality, which was the Seniors for Seniors program, which was for those people who've been isolated, and the effects of that impacts upon the texture of loneliness. is about listening to what older people have got to give back to communities and can give back to younger people. And equally, what younger people then can learn from older people. That then provides the conditions of self-esteem, self-confidence building for both groups at the individual level. At the community level, it creates more of a sustainable community because both groups feel much more commonality because they've been brought together. And that's about, could be educators working with seniors in high school, or care settings working with older people or seniors in care settings, but bringing them together in terms of meaningful relationships is something that Eric has been fantastic and has underlined that in bringing to the fore, both in the US and internationally as well.
Well, thank you, Professor Powell. I know that loneliness is actually going to be a huge issue for all of us, regardless of age, because we're socially connected on social media, but we are more isolated than ever. And I love the concept of Seniors for Seniors, and that it's like a mentorship program too, right? Where you pair people with similar interests that come together, that can, the senior that has a lot to still give, a lot of knowledge and experience to still share. This is something we used to have in our collectivistic societies, where before in our little villages, we would go to the seniors and get that kind of advice, but we don't have that opportunity. So Eric, can you talk a little bit more about the Seniors for Seniors and how that's helping the elderly community feel recharged and rejuvenated and feel useful helping out the youth?
Well, we have lived through an experience right now with, because it's very difficult to get into senior homes and get people in the doors to talk to them. So we have some case studies, but people I've talked to have been, seems to be very transformational, helping them out. Like my grandmother has friends in Utah where she lives, that we have some kids talking to them. We actually have some high school kids in Colorado talking to them, or we have some kids locally in Colorado talking to people locally in Colorado. How that makes sense. Colorado students talking to the senior adults in Colorado, and they've been saying this is getting together and talking to them and just feeling validated. I think is a big part of it. Then that, as Jesse kind of hit it to a little bit, they still both value who they are as a person, as well as the youth are feeling valued. Then that, besides their parents, besides the teacher, or somebody else is taking interest in me, I am worthwhile. And then they have these avenues to get information from, as they don't have to maybe just look at Google to find out answers. If we all, and that's not always the best way to find life experiences. And doing so, that these youth and these adults are finding that they have a lot in common and where they help each other by not just isolation and loneliness, but as well as life experiences to learn from, or even a personal drive to keep going.
So the name Seniors for Seniors come from seniors in high school for seniors in the elderly community?
That's correct.
Okay. So I know that you guys are doing your part as far as connecting the youth with, and it can help the youth as well, because there are a lot of youth that are feeling isolated. They don't have grandparents, or they might live far away from their grandparents. And this is keeping kids off the streets, and it's helping them feel more responsible. And I'm sure it looks good on their college application, right?
Yeah.
I hope so. It's a very 50-50 thing. Our program is very about, Jason, you talked about, it's very mentorship, it's very service. And we are, Jason and I talk all the time about, we learn, as you know, in a piece of two, service is addicting. You learn to serve somebody, you seek opportunities. If we see an opportunity that may be inconvenient, you know what happens after doing it. You're going to do it anyways, most of the time, because hey, that person needed my help, or I like that feeling I get inside for doing so. And that's these youth are going to learn that more and more. Like I was in church programs from church, or I was in Boy Scouts growing up. I learned the value of service pretty young. It's really kind of came together.
Well, in a time where there was a time when, like I said, the seniors were revered and they were the elders of a community and people looked to them for guidance. And now we're kind of isolating and shutting away our seniors and our elderly community. And so a lot of people don't have access to them. I love that some people have the programs where they go into the schools and they read to young children. to me, this reminds me kind of like a big brother, big sister, where the seniors that are the elderly are helping out the young and that they're in a mentorship program. So Professor Powell, can you talk a little bit about I know you guys are doing your part as far as pairing up these individuals together. Can you tell us what the rest of us can do if we're not a part of Seniors for Seniors and helping out the elderly communities, regardless of where we're from, whether in England or in the United States or anywhere around the world? What else can we do? Because this, like you said, this is an epidemic and it's something we all need to do something about.
Well, I mean, the first thing that is a recognition that older people who live in, for example, whether it's residential care or whether they're, for example's sake, they live on their own, or they may live with people but still feel isolated and lonely, is that communities can still reach out to those people and make them aware that they're not alone, and basically that, given the opportunity, that there are opportunities in the community. I mean, the community's central to it, really. And obviously educators, as well as, more holistically, educators, care providers, working together, finding out, where in particular older people are living in which settings, for example, say, and actually listening to their narratives and listening to their experiences and their stories, because they're so important, older people, and they're important in terms of carriers of history, because they can teach people much about the lessons of history. So say, for example, younger people today have much anxiety in terms of mental health about COVID, and that's been devastating across the life course, as we all know. But older people can teach a number of people as well about going back to the Second World War and about the anxiety that people felt about, say, for example, will they see their family again? And what lessons can be learned. And that type of mentorship across intergenerations, going back to that Seniors for Seniors as an example, is one aspect or one theme by which mentorship and coaching can be sort of enmeshed between young and old in that context. But there are many other ways and means by which, number one is about is about getting rid of the concept of ageism, as Eric had focused on, because society, for whatever reason, ageism as a definition is the unwarranted application of negative stereotypes to older people that don't bear any reality to who they are as people. And as soon as we dismantle those stereotypes, we start to see older people for who they are, people. And if we have values, for example, a humanity approach to wanting to help older people and provide the opportunity so that their voice is heard, and that then helps to develop their self-confidence in communities, then everyone has a responsibility and opportunity to partake in that. And by doing that, that can be about, say, for example, getting involved with, as I say, and bound to be biased, the Seniors for Seniors program, which can then be applied internationally with regard to the UK. And that obviously one aspect of that then is about bringing generations together. And that then gets rid of assumptions about us and them, because that's part of the problem as well within communities, is that there seems to be some intergenerational divide. Historically, in particular, that young was over here, them, and old was over here as us. When us and them are irrelevant, and there shouldn't be any limits. And obviously, that approach in terms of humanity should be the underlying principle and driving force, which is about enhancing people's quality of life. And we've all got a responsibility in order to do that. And the smallest details are the biggest significance. Saying hello to somebody, making someone feel valued, making them feel listened, all stepping stones to making someone's confidence feel enhanced. And everyone in any small feature and any small form can play a part in that. And especially younger people through service in this particular program, through Seniors for Seniors.
Yeah, you're right. There's so much knowledge and information and history that they can share us. They're literally living history books. They can give us way more about what happened in history than anything we're learning in a history book. I know I volunteered at an Alzheimer's center to work with patients that were struggling with Alzheimer's and dementia, but even though they might not remember what they had for breakfast or anybody's name in their current family, their long-term memory was still good. And just to go on that down memory lane with them and share their stories, it was so, like you said, service is addicting, and you get way more from them than we give back. And I felt like I was going in there for my own benefit instead of for theirs, because it felt so wonderful to sit with them and talk to them. But I am concerned in that by 2050, it's predicted that 50% of the population will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. Do either one of you have any information as to whether this loneliness and social isolation could contribute to the rise in Alzheimer's moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in the discipline and paradigm of geriatric medicine, there is the relationship. Research, there is a body of research that has highlighted the effects of, as you quite rightly pointed out, the knock-on effects that can be social, then biological, and how they interact. And obviously that can begin with being isolated, then has the effects of loneliness, then depression. But then obviously if someone has clinical depression, that then can be managed. But then what there's an unintended consequence of clinical depression. Sometimes some people are given certain forms of medication and then can't get off that medication, but that medication has long-term consequences as well. And that needs to be looked at more at the same time. As you just pointed out, population aging does bring challenges. And one of the effects of it is about many of the forms of medication that older people are on or are given or are told to take, as it were, with regard to when they're in care homes. Research has shown that many older people don't realize or don't know why they've been given the medicine they've been given. So there needs to be much more transparency in terms of that. I would argue anyway. But you're right. You're right. Alzheimer's is a big issue. Memory lanes and the idea of memory cafes. And they talk about age-friendly societies and communities where workplaces are much more sensitized to those issues for the future. So say, for example, where you've got older workers who, for example's sake, whose mental integrity may be struggling a little bit, but, there are support structures put in place in those work environments in order to help support them. And they're the type of long-term strategies that employers should be thinking about now, rather than waiting for, care homes to manage people for the future. We've all got a responsibility in society for each and every one of us, because we all partake within that society. The Seniors for Seniors program is what you mentioned earlier before about if there is an accelerating aging population, then it's more important than ever that if there's a relationship between loneliness and dementia for the future, then in order to address loneliness now, could maybe cut that down a little bit if we have much more meaningful interactions in terms of enhancing people's well-being. And obviously well-being is as important as the illness model. And in the context of bringing young and old together, which obviously provides the conditions by which older people then are much more actively involved within society, rather than just, dare I say it, how ageism can pervade itself where they're ignored. And subsequently, the Seniors for Seniors program brings communities to life, because obviously educators, senior providers, care home providers are brought together in order to enhance the quality of life of older people on the one hand and bring them as mentors. But at the same time, younger people can also be mentors, because they can teach the older people much too. So it's a dialogical relationship where they learn from each other. I mean, lifelong learning is something by which is a never-ending process for every age. And that's what makes what Eric has put together is so transformational and so important. So as a social vehicle, it's so important to address future biological problems.
I like the bidirectional teaching and role modeling, right? Like for me, for some of my patients that are seniors, I can be helpful by helping them set up their phone or their tablet and teaching them about how to use the internet. And they teach me so much more about life and just like I said, their own history and the lessons that they've learned. So as far as your Seniors for Seniors program, how do you select the people? And then what are the age ranges that are being, is there a cutoff? Is there like a 65 and older? Is there a certain cutoff as far as the age that you pair people, and how do people go about getting paired?
Well, for high school, for the youth, we try to keep them in high school age, at least 15. So that the connection with the mentoring can take place better as far as maturity, and some too. That's in the high school years where they're find out their career focus and their goals towards after graduation. But as for the senior adults, we don't really specifically have that age limit or just discrimination because, somebody that's got in a car accident and they're retired now because they're in a car accident and they're isolated and lonely and they're able to, physically get out and work anymore, or other scenarios that go along with that. We don't want to discriminate them from joining our program. They have a voice to be heard, and we strongly believe that anybody, no matter what the background is, if someone that's been living on the streets, got a living in a senior community, they have something that's shared. If there's someone that's been a Fortune 500 company CEO, we believe they have a story to share these youth into the world, and we want to value every individual we can. And if the senior people that are living with loved ones or the senior communities, or someone who knows somebody that he may be interested, if we get a name and a phone number for them, our board is more than happy to call that individual up and talk to them and get them started. But for the youth, as they're more tech savvy and the more access to the internet and the smartphones and so forth, you go on our website, seniorsforseniors.org, and subscribe. They'll give me, myself or my president, an email saying that you subscribe to our website, and then from there, we'll get you some information from your background. We talk also from the senior adults about their interests, their goals, and who they are a little bit in a nutshell, and then we get them together and I got a 3-way phone call, and we connect them together. If that makes sense to you guys.
So the age limit is seniors in high school or just high school students 15 and up. And it doesn't matter how old the seniors are. They could be anywhere as far as if they match with the interest of the youth, then you bring them together and they go to seniorsforseniors.org and they fill out an application, and you guys do a matching as far as you interview both?
Yes.
Is there a background check of these adults that you guys make sure that they are not criminals, pedophiles, don't have a history, that they're going to be safe when they're paired up with these kids? What does that process look like? I feel like when it's working with kids, there should be a mandatory background check just to make sure that you're not pairing anybody in a dangerous situation.
Obviously, we are sensitized to safeguarding and obviously due diligence in the context of, who we're pairing up. And, that's about mitigation of risk. And obviously, we're aware of that and sensitized to that in terms of, making sure that who we pair together, that people are safe. And, we are very, very much adept to that in terms of our governance. And equally at the same time as backed with that is, with risk is also rights or human rights. And then, part of that process then is about then, once mitigation of risk and due diligence has taken place and the forms have gone through process, and then once that transparent process is put in place, then those relationships then can start to be built. But there is one thing I would like to add. Obviously, it's about one of the things about the podcast is about transforming anxiety. Anxiety in terms of youth. One of the interesting issues is about bringing youth and your older people together on the Seniors for Seniors program. Is some younger people may have a relationship that are broken down, and they think, oh, it's the end of the world, and obviously become very, very anxious in terms of thinking someone doesn't want to know me anymore. But if they're mentored by older people who've had a long history of relationships, for example's sake, and may turn around and say, well, actually, it's not the end of the world, and this is how I dealt with it, then that type of relationship that's being cultivated and built based upon mentorship is obviously transformational in the context of helping socialize someone into seeing that actually it's not the end of the world, it's a confidence builder, and that then enhances and strengthens the relationship between those two groups and makes that community that little bit more resilient, because it then starts to create the conditions of trust. And that is the essence of what we're building towards.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful concept. But like I said, when you're dealing with children, it does become the issue of safety and security. And so that's something that I would be concerned about signing up my own child for a program like this. So I'm glad that you guys are looking into that. And then also, is there a charge or a fee to the participants of this program?
Yeah, it's volunteering.
We do accept donations, of course. Well, it's probably a nonprofit, but we don't want that to be a barrier. Actually, I started the program. I had the idea. I started for profit, and I was finding that some senior communities that were willing to or able to spend some money to help out to promote what I was doing, and other communities couldn't. And that wasn't our focus. And we don't want anything to be a barrier for that. So there's no cost at all.
Okay. So knowing what both of you know now about just working with the communities, bringing the elderly with the young, what advice would you have had for your own selves when you guys were teens or young adults about just working with the elderly? Because I know when I was a teenager, somebody that was 30 seemed to be so old, right? And now that you're on the other side of it, you're just like, what? That's not even that old. So what advice would each of you give to your younger self? Just everything that you know right now.
What I would say to my younger self is that older people are people, and I have got so much to learn from them. I am an open book, and the lessons that I can learn and the insights that they've got from history will help me enormously and mentor me enormously, and help me not maybe have made some of the mistakes that I made at a younger age. Because if I had listened out to older people much more, my younger self, perhaps maybe I wouldn't have made as many of the mistakes that I make. So in other words, older people are there to be valued, not to be not listened to, but by listening to them and at the same time valuing them and their contribution, that would benefit me as a younger person in my human development, and then how I then go on to interact with other people. It would make me a better person.
Growing up, and then even now, I think that what I tell myself now is don't wait till the person that how you feel about them. I've lost, in senior care, as well as people in my church congregations. Last year, I've lost two people I feel pretty close to. And my grandfather back when I was in high school. When you have these opportunities to learn from these people, as well as people in your family that you love and care about, make sure they know that, because you don't know when it's going to be your last time to say that to them.
You're so right. When it comes to working or having elderly people in our lives, it's important to let them know how we feel about them and thank them for all that they've done for us and just spend time with them. I mean, I'm lucky and blessed enough to have had grandparents that I've sat with and I've learned from, and I love their stories. And the one regret I have is my grandfather was 97 years old, and we kept saying, we should record what he's telling us so we can have it for later. And we're like, oh, we'll do it one day. He was 97 years old, and we were still waiting for one day to record him, and we missed it. And he passed away, and we never got to have those recordings. But he had great stories and a sense of humor, and just sitting with them and listening can have lasting, lifelong benefits for us. So I do appreciate having this discussion with you guys, because in my community, we value our elders and we don't let them go and be isolated. But I know that that's not the case in a lot of communities. And so taking the time, finding a way to volunteer or spending time with them or spending time with your own grandparents, reaching out, telling them you care about them, or joining something like Seniors for Seniors can go a long way in alleviating some of the issues that are going on with the senior community right now. And the isolation is going to impact all of us, not just the senior community. We need to do more to be there for each other, because we're social beings and we need each other, right? And I think being around the seniors makes us appreciate our time and to make the most of the time that we do have left, and that we shouldn't take it for granted, especially because either they're possibly going to die or they've lost somebody close to them. And so we keep hearing about the loss, and that death is a reality that we all need to kind of be aware of and make the most of the time while we have on this earth and not waste it.
Yeah. Obviously, one concept we haven't mentioned today, which is really important in terms of that, is about that concept of intergenerationality. You're right. Old age is always equated with in some way about loss, but loss is also about the life course. And many younger people and older people may work together, but there are also many younger people who pass away as well. And so we're always, the lesson to learn is that we're all mortal, and we should enjoy our meaningful interactions and relationships that we have with each other on a daily basis, and learn from each other. And part of that process is obviously, as we mentioned earlier, young and old is one example by which that can be transformational for both, in terms of confidence building, in terms of community leadership, and obviously helps change society's views towards groups about ageism, and gets rid of that and attacks that concept as it should be, because it should not be there.
That, and there's a stigma towards mental illness, and then there's ageism, there's color, there's so many issues that we need to leave behind and just talk to each other and do it for the sake of our mental health and well-being, because the more connected we are, the more we are a collective society, the better we're going to feel mentally. And getting rid of ageism is definitely something that I would like to see as well. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me and having this conversation today. I hope we make an impact as far as changing the narrative of how we treat our seniors and our elders in our community. They are a valuable asset. They're a resource that we are not utilizing enough, and we need to do more for our elderly community. We need to do more for reaching out to them and learning from them, because they have a lot that they can share with us. And I'm glad that you guys reached out to me to have this conversation. So I really appreciate you.
Appreciate you, Nafisa.
Due to the recent pandemic and subsequent social isolation, our seniors are suffering from loneliness more than any other community. The past 2 years have made the holidays feel even more isolating. A recent article from Harvard addresses the impact social isolation has on memory and overall cognition. I'll link the article in the show notes if you want to check it out. What Professor Jason and Eric are trying to do is what's needed more of right now. You can do your part by reaching out to your parents and grandparents, but you can also send cards and make phone calls to other family members as well. I'd love to hear your feedback about this interview. Go to transforminganxiety.com/44 to leave me a comment and learn more about the work Jason and Eric are doing for the senior community. If you haven't already, you can show support for the Mental Health Break podcast by subscribing wherever you're tuning in from today. We have some great interviews lined up, so you don't want to miss a single episode. Subscribe today so you get notified when new episodes drop. I can't wait to see you here next week. Same time, same place. Bye for now.